Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you once again from Washington, D.C., and I got back rather late yesterday evening from Philadelphia, where I was fortunate enough to attend, let's say, events around the Democratic National Convention. Not inside, because I'm not a delegate and I'm not I'm not a part of that operation, but outside. And what I was able to see outside the convention was on Tuesday afternoon, at the time of the roll call of the states that gave Hillary Clinton the nomination. I visited the park, I think it's Franklin D. Roosevelt Park, outside the convention hall. The convention hall was in far South Philadelphia, way south of the center city, not at all in the center of things. But there was this park. You had to walk a mile or more to get from any kind of parking to get into this park. And, you have to understand, the Hillary voters, of course, are satisfied and inside the convention. And then there are Bernie delegates that were inside the convention, and I would say 85% or so of the Bernie delegates were also, great political realists and were willing to make the obvious transition towards nominating the person, supporting the person who won the nomination. There was a kind of fringe element inside who were intent on disruptions. Now, who were they? I don't know. Were they paid by Trump? Anybody can get bought by Trump. So those people inside, the Bernie or bust, the ridiculous ones, you will have noticed, even a person as dubious as Sarah Silverman can come up with something true and useful, saying you guys are ridiculous, and that's what she said. And I understand she's already been hacked. Anonymous, was it Anonymous went after her as a sellout or something or other. So they were ridiculous, however, because you've got to be realistic. You've got to remember that in the background looms the threat of the fascist Trump and his stubby fingers on the thermonuclear button, the fireball, the incineration, the thermonuclear detonations. That's the threat of Trump. Chaos, the end of the world, thermonuclear exchange with the people that he now pretends are his friends. I don't think they are. I don't think Putin is a friend of Trump. However, these are complicated questions, and we'll try to clarify them as we go along. But as we will see, the most effective argument against Trump is those stubby fingers on the thermonuclear button. So some Bernie delegates were able to understand that. I would have to say that the Bernie delegates out in the park, they weren't delegates. Sorry, I got to be precise. The Bernie supporters who were not inside the convention, but were rather in this park, were, when I got there, in a very foul mood because the roll call vote was just taking place. And they were, of course, deeply disappointed. But I think the problems of these people go far beyond just what happens at a convention. I think these are embittered individuals. They're cynical. They seem to be dominated by resentment. And unfortunately, I don't think they're going to be very positive politically. Some of this stuff was actually funny. One guy had a sign saying, "America was never great." Apparently that's the revolutionary Communist Party line, right? Old Bob Avakian from the Bay Area RU, Revolutionary Union, right? His current form is the Revolutionary Communist Party. So they say, Trump claims he's going to make America great again. Hillary says it's already great. but their line is, it was never great and never will be. All right, that was one. And then one character of these disgruntled Bernie people on the outside of the convention, I would stress again, as he walked by, he said, secessionism comes next. So I think what you have here, unfortunately, is the politics of hate. And the politics of hate will not get you anywhere. And therefore, it's just the way it is, right? There's a certain kind of residue out there of anarchists and people for whom I think anti-war is kind of a pretext when they want to raise hell in the streets, except they're getting a little bit too old for that kind of stuff. So I thought that was actually rather shocking, but there it was. So I don't know what more is likely to be heard of those people, because I don't credit them with a great deal of political initiative. Anyway, the following 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, yesterday, the Tax Wall Street Party was at Independence Mall. That is to say, we were within sight of Independence Hall, and we were in an area where there were many delegates staying in hotels, and there was the outdoor stage or broadcast booth of MSNBC. And unfortunately, on the afternoon of Wednesday when we got there, we were about to show our characteristic signs, Trump equals Nazi. Unfortunately, the Westboro Baptist Church showed up with signs that must have been 15 feet high or 20 feet high, towering over everybody. And they had the highest power bullhorns I've ever heard, right? These were bullhorns that would make you fear for the safety of your eardrums. So that essentially, what appeared to happen was the Westboro people arrived and MSNBC fled. They shut down their operations and retreated inside some office building. And then yesterday, unfortunately, there we were again at the broadcast booth, and the forecast was for rain. So what MSNBC then did was they simply took down their broadcast booth. They removed the bunting. They put down the curtains. Most of the technicians went inside. Now, why do I tell you this story? It is that we now have a 100-day presidential campaign, and there are important things that people can do with relatively limited resources. The first thing is, if either Trump or Hillary comes anywhere near where you are, I urge you, I implore you, go to the Tax Wall Street Party website, and you will find a producible version of the Trump equals Nazi poster that we put out. And you can choose whichever one you want. We have one of them which shows a red face, pretty much the devil, but it's also Trump, and you can see that. And underneath it just says Nazi. That's the most Laconian of anyone we have. But then we've also got the picture of the Nazi giving the Hitler salute, but in a business suit and a Chesterfield overcoat, and Trump equals Nazi. Produce those. You can, if you do it in advance, you can do it relatively economically, right? I would say $20-30 will get it if you have the lead time. And if you want to do it immediately, which I would urge you to do anyway, it probably gets you up more towards the $60 to $70 range. But once you have that, you have it for the entire duration of the campaign. So I think it's extremely valuable. And let's just remember, leaping ahead of all the analysis, who now says Trump is a fascist? Obama, the president of the United States, has in effect joined our campaign. Obama is telling people Trump is a fascist. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World in Washington, D.C., right? Just fresh back from the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. Yes, indeed. Obama says that if you challenge American values, be you a fascist, a communist, a jihadi, or a homegrown demagogue, You will lose. Now, many people have jumped to the conclusion that Trump is somehow the homegrown demagogue, and I'm not sure that is correct at all. And what I'm telling you now is basically a serious analysis, although it may sound somewhat novel to people. When Obama says fascist, communist, jihadi, homegrown demagogue, who is he talking about? When he says fascist, I contend he's talking about Trump. That's Trump, the fascist, right off the bat. Fascist Trump. Trump equals Nazi, Trump equals fascist. You know the drill. Secondly, you can be a communist. Well, who's a communist? The president of China is a communist. President Xi, the head of the Communist Chinese Party. He is a party to not just a communist party, he's a party to that worldwide strategic alliance with the British, the Chinese-British alliance. Perfide Albion, right? British treachery rides again with China to destroy the dollar and bring down the United States and try to provoke a world financial panic in such a way that the British will be shorted and covered and with options and derivatives and all this stuff, so that they will profit when the others go down, which is their traditional historic pattern. You can have a crash, you can have a panic, you can turn it against somebody if you know it's coming, and the way you know it's coming is that you're going to unleash it. So fascist means Trump. Communist, well, who's the biggest communist in the world? It's the president of China. Jihadi, hey, we know who that is. That's Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, who unfortunately has survived this coup and is now proceeding to essentially purge the entire society, from librarians to teachers to generals to everybody else. They're all getting the axe. Heads are rolling everywhere as Erdogan attempts the night of the long knives. And he may go on with this for a while, but I think he's going to pay a price. I don't think you can govern modern Turkey in that way, right? I think Ataturk's reforms are in some ways irreversible, and that Erdogan is not. He doesn't have the brains or the guts to reverse the great Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, one of my nation-building heroes of the 20th century. And then we have the homegrown demagogue. And as far as I can see, that's Ted Cruz. He's homegrown. Right? That's the indigenous, what can we say, the autochthonous ideology of the Republican Party. So fascist, Trump. Communist, Xi. Jihadi, Erdogan. And homegrown demagogue, Ted Cruz. That's how I read that. So I think that's good. Now, here's the point. The purpose of this convention, the reason this convention has such a tremendous importance, because I think it really is important, is it was and remains indispensable to organize, mobilize, and ideologically arm the Democratic Party to defeat Trump. Because, in sort of military terms, the only thing standing between us and Mad Dog Trump, or Traitor Trump, as I've started calling him this week, Traitor Trump, who's calling in October surprise attacks now openly on TV. He doesn't hide it. He says, come on in, October surprise, I need you. Traitor Trump is calling that in. We've got to defeat him. So who can defeat him? Well, there is the Democratic Party, and they have, if they mobilize, they have sufficient resources. They can do this, but it will require an ideological overhaul. It will require a number of things, and we'll be the ones here telling you exactly what these are as time goes on. So what do they have to do? Essentially, in very, very brief summary, the points are these. In order to defeat Trump, and we have this summed up on a leaflet we have these really nice little sort of quarto size leaflets, right? They're cutting an 8.5 by 11 into 4 pieces. And here's our leaflet that we handed out here. Trump fascism is at the gates. Democrats must rally. Well, Trump fascism. When we set up with our signs near the MSNBC outdoor stage on Independence Mall, the first thing I have to tell you is the support, the relief that some people had, the welcome for Straight Talk, the real thing. They were delighted that we were there. There was not one negative response that was articulated. I mean, somebody might have been walking by and saying, I don't like that, but they never voiced it. I heard not one negative element in terms of our signs, and they were, big, dominating. People loved them. We must have had, several hundred. I would guess about 300 people wanted to get their picture taken with the signs. They wanted to take pictures of us with the signs and indeed come around and stand with us and get their picture taken. We had the Voice of America come around. We had a local Jewish newspaper come around. I was on television in Thailand the other night because of what a reporter had seen there, and so forth, right? We'll track down all these references, but it's something that changes the atmosphere. Trump equals Nazi. Laughing, joking, delighted. Congressman went by. That guy Ben Ginsberg, the former Republican RNC lawyer who now works for cable TV, he was there too. Stirred the pot, created tremendous ferment. And the idea, what we told them, anybody who looked like a power broker, we said, this is what you've got to do. And if you don't, Trump will eat your lunch, and maybe Trump will eat you too. So what are the points? Well, first of all, you've got to call him a fascist and a Nazi. Now, none other than President Obama has now, I would say, taken the lead in attaching fascist to Trump. And that's real progress. That's good, because in many ways, the greatest focus at this convention was that people were, they were excited about Obama, right? They the influence, the charisma, if you will, of Obama. So he's now said fascist, and that's a big step forward in shutting down Trump. And we'll be back in just a minute. So the points to defeat Trump are 3. Fascist, or if you like, Nazi, right? That's 1. Nazi fascist, as the Italians said in 1944, 45. Right? Nazi fascist. That's Trump. Second point, mentally ill. Not all there. Psychotic. Too dangerous. Erratic. Unreliable. A leap in the dark. The abyss. And you put those together, what is the sort of epicenter or center of gravity of those two arguments? Don't let a Nazi in the White House, and certainly not a mentally ill, psychotic Nazi. But what are you afraid of? Well, it's the thermonuclear button. That's the point. That is the argument. You can see these, what can we call them? Renegade workers who seem to be, some of them are supporting Trump. I don't think as many as said. And above all, crazed petty bourgeoisie, crazed small business people, the sort of Perot voters, right? The brokers, insurance broker, real estate broker, stock broker. These are crazed people. You can't argue to them that, you're destroying civilization or you're destroying all the norms of civilized behavior. They don't care about that. And above all, you can't confront them with a school marm like Elizabeth Warren. That's what they see. They see a school marm. And the reason that doesn't work with them is that they hate school marms because they were academic failures, right? A lot of them couldn't graduate. They couldn't do the academic work, and they hate the school teacher, often a woman, who was the one who, as they see it, tormented them. In reality, he was trying to teach them something, but they found that humiliating, and they were recalcitrant and disobedient and incorrigible and all the rest of that. So you need an argument of a certain type. And this argument I call the politics of life and death, because that's what it comes down to. The ultimate basis of politics is, do you want to survive or do you want to die? Choose. Trump, the con man, the con artist. And I'm from New York too, so I can tell him too, Bloomberg. The con artist Trump is coming for you. It's not just that he wants to rip you off at a distance. He's coming for you. How could you die? Well, you can be incinerated in a thermonuclear fireball. Okay? Let me just there's one very interesting example of this here. I have a Twitter of a cartoon. If I can just call this up here, it takes a second. Here we have a cartoon with Trump in the White House, okay? Look at my Twitter feed for this, right? Webster G. Tarpley, Twitter. So here we are in the Oval Office, and a red-faced, enraged, apoplectic, geek-act Trump is behind the desk with the Great Seal. It's the Oval Office. A Secret Service guy is holding the codes, and the codes are now automated. The codes are a briefcase with electronic equipment inside, right, and things to punch, and launch codes. So the Trump character, red-faced, screaming, apoplectic, Putin unfriended me on Facebook? How dare he, right? I'll show that loser. And he's reaching over to push the thermonuclear button. Now, that's no joke. That's real. That's Trump. And then in the background, we have a couple of tourists, right? Two middle Americans, I suppose, right? And they say, oh, President Trump's shoot from the hip, politically incorrect impulsiveness is so refreshing. Yeah, except it's World War III. So that's the first, right? That this is one way you can die, right? Thermonuclear fireball. That's Trump. Get out all the Barry Goldwater stuff, right? Get out the daisies. Get out anything you can find that can bear on these great questions of war and peace. And remember, you got to tell me, of the two candidates, which one is a psychotic and which one has a fascist mass movement? Think about that. Those are the two main considerations. Who's a psychotic and who has a fascist mass movement that's violent, like the Ku Klux Klan or those gun-toting lunkheads, right? Those characters, right? The survivalists of the Cloven Bundy and his clan, right? Who threaten federal officers, point-loaded rifles, and they want to privatize, just like every damn billionaire. Those guys want to privatize U.S. public lands and essentially appropriate them for themselves and forget about the public interest, right? The public be damned, says Cloven Bundy and his two idiot sons. So this all goes on. How else can you die? Well, you can starve to death in a depression. And with Trump, I saw one of his surrogates, this guy, Jeffrey Lord, is the resident Trump apologist on CNN. And he says, I was disappointed with the Democratic convention because they didn't talk about the debt. The debt. The U.S. public debt. Oh, yes. Almost 20 trillion, sorry. Jeffrey Lord, yeah. So I would have said, if I'd been on a panel, I'd say, Lord, do you mean the debt that Trump wants to default on? That he wants to take us over the cliff? The earlier Republicans had taken us right up to the cliff, right? So the U.S. public debt was then downgraded. So, Lord, Jeffrey Lord, right? Are you talking about that debt? The one that your candidate says he wants to default on for the first time in history? Well, you do that, you've essentially thrown the entire world financial system out of whack, because that, in spite of all fantasies about other reserve currencies, that's the one that is there today. That's the one that does a trillion or a trillion and a half every day and can give you in cash, 3 trillion, 4 trillion, whatever you want on the same day, right? Cash, OG, on the same day. So with Trump, you're going to have a depression. And then the third one is you can die, for example, from some epidemic disease that the Republicans refuse to combat because they don't want to pay, because they're fiscal conservatives, right? They're genocidalists. They're exponents of genocidal, killer austerity. So those are, I think, the issues. Mentally ill, psychotic, fascist, Nazi, those two come together. Put that in the Oval Office. What's the worst thing? He could get to the thermonuclear launch codes, or he could do things and say things that would cause default, because he'd be working with those Republicans in Congress, right? Those anti-government right-wing anarchists. And I guess a right-wing anarchist is not that far from a fascist in any case. And then what we've just seen on the Zika virus, right? The Republicans are out of town again. And in the White House briefing this afternoon, we were reminded that it was back in February and March that Obama first called for additional money. Yes, additional money. And we don't care how it's paid for at this point, right? It's an emergency. People are going to die. Kids are going to have their lives like that. You can essentially fight them on that. So that's what you've got to keep it. Back in a minute on World Crisis. World Crisis Radio. So what have we learned so far? Obama says if you try to negate American values, be you a fascist or a communist or a jihadi or a homegrown demagogue, you're going to lose. Trump is the fascist. President Xi of China, is the communist. Erdogan of Turkey is the jihadi. And Ted Cruz is the homegrown demagogue. So again, with that, by my reading, Obama has, in effect, in a kind of indirect, metaphorical, Aesopian way, he has embraced the analysis that we've been putting out here for these many months. Okay? And then the big rap on Trump becomes psychotic, Nazi fascist, and the locus where this reaches the greatest tension, the nuclear launch codes. It also applies then to behaviors in a kind of financial crisis where he's gone bankrupt so many times. He regards debt, he thinks debt can be renegotiated, and there's no, it's actually better for you, right, as a bankrupt entrepreneur. He's a banqueroteur. He wants to become a banqueroteur d'etat. He wants to be a state bankruptcy protagonist, no longer just a private bankrupt. And then there's this other question about decisions concerning public health, which could also lead to untold morbidity, mortality, and so forth. Now let's talk about a couple of things. On the thermonuclear button, if you remember that wonderful singer of half a century ago, Leslie Gore, right? It's my button, and I'll launch if I want to. Launch if I want to. Launch if I want to. You would launch too if they badmouth you. So somebody ought to get busy, right? Maybe some group could record that, right? You could make a good parody with somebody with a Trump wig, could be the lead singer. It's my button, and I'll launch if I want to. Launch if I want to. Launch if I want to. You would launch too if they badmouth you. So all at this stupid, idiotic level of dissing, right? So we've heard from Obama now. Mrs. Clinton, the principal question with Mrs. Clinton is, I don't care about her voice, her appearance. I want her to show that she's going to fight Trump. And this is essentially the big question, the acid test, right? The litmus test for the Republican Party, the Democratic Party in this convention is precisely, if you don't defeat Trump, fight him and defeat him, then you have fallen down on the job. You're worthless, essentially. You're nowhere world historically. So here's what Madame Clinton says. Ask yourself, do you really think Donald Trump has the temperament to be commander-in-chief? Donald Trump can't even handle the rough and tumble of a presidential campaign. He loses his cool at the slightest provocation. When he's gotten a tough question from a reporter, when he's been challenged in a debate, when he sees a protester at one of his rallies. Now imagine, if you dare, imagine him in the Oval Office facing a real crisis. Think about President Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 1962, pushing his advisors back, right? With the kind of moral authority, strength of character that Kennedy had recently acquired, but through a lifetime of suffering, right? Not, my personal Vietnam, as Trump says. So imagine Trump in the Oval Office facing a real crisis. A man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons. This is the big point. A man, Trump can be baited with a tweet. You can play him like a violin. You can jerk him around. You can pull his chain, pull his string by getting his goat, right? Again, your wife is ugly. You're not really rich, on and on. A man you can bait with a tweet is not a man we can trust with nuclear weapons. This is the long and the short of it, right? Do you want chaos? Do you want the continuation of civilization as you've known it? Then she goes on to say, I can't put it any better than Jackie Kennedy did after the Cuban Missile Crisis. She said that what worried President Kennedy during that very dangerous time was that a war might be started not by big men with self-control and restraint, but by little men, the ones moved by fear and pride. America's strength does not come from lashing out. It relies on smarts, judgment, cool resolve, and the precise application of strategic power. Now, of course, we have our doubts about Mrs. Clinton. But again, is she psychotic? I say not psychotic. Is Trump psychotic? Yes. That's already important. And then, does she have a fascist mass movement? No. Her supporters can meet in a phone booth, right? In other words, she can't turn out crowds. There is no fascist mass movement. She doesn't have the white supremacists, the alternate right, the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis. She doesn't have any of that. So who does she have, right? She doesn't have it. And those are the 2 points. It means that she's as a warmonger, she'd be weaker. And we ought to also think about some other things with that. All right. Now let's we want to talk about the October surprise and the strategy of tension, which is this other huge thing. Let's talk about, concerning Trump's mental instability. We have to look here at a number of interesting publications. We want to call attention once again to I want to call your attention to Keith Olbermann, right? The former host of Countdown on MSNBC. Go and look at him at Keith Olbermann on Twitter. And what he's going through, as you recall, last week he put out that 20-point sanity test or insanity screening test, psychosis screening test, concerning Trump, and he came to the conclusion that Trump could not pass a sanity test, right? He couldn't, because he would be flagged as a likely psychotic, and he is. So here we have Trump speaking, and he's telling us how he wanted to hit somebody. He wanted to engage in fisticuffs, and he's telling us about this. Here's the raving of Trump, right? This enraged monologue stream of consciousness. I was going to hit them so hard, I was all set. And then I got a call from a highly respected governor, and he said, "How's it going, Donald?" And I said, "Oh, it's going good. But there's one guy in particular, a very little guy. I was going to hit that guy so hard his head would spin. He wouldn't know what the hell happened." And so this is the mind of Trump. And it was easy to enrage him. If you're a third party, and this may be what's happening right now, we'll get to this in a minute, or a third party, you set up attacks that are false flag attacks, right? You attack Trump, make him look like it's coming from country A, and you're in reality in country Z, so you can sick Trump against country A and get him, for example, if country A is your rival, get him to destroy country A, and you can then proceed. So no psychotics in the Oval Office, please, and please no fascists, Nazi fascists, in the Oval Office. Back in a minute. To our second hour of World Crisis Radio. We are now past both national conventions, the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, that midnight in America, that lugubrious Gothic tale of horror with lots and lots of D-list has-beens on the speaking program. And then we've had the Democrats, of course, with the big geek act of the Bernie people the first night. Look, you want to be in politics, you got to be a pro, right? If you're a delegate, you should already be a pro, and you should realize the consequences of your actions. And I didn't expect to agree with Sarah Silverman, but this little lady has told the truth that performance was ridiculous, disrupting your convention in the face of a fascist threat. That's the whole point. Hitler is ante portas. Hitler is at the gates, and you're wasting time with this stuff. And remember, Bernie Sanders lost the nomination because he didn't fight for it. She would not have been able to stop him. If Bernie Sanders in that first October debate had said, "Hillary, we want to hear all about your emails because we think that you're trying to dodge future Freedom of Information Act requests. You're trying to cover up how you organized those cynical CIA destabilizations in Tunisia, in Libya, in Syria, in these other countries, in Yemen, right? That was a destabilization, and you did it, and you should be held to account." But he didn't do that. He said, "We don't care about your damn emails." And then he wouldn't fight for the Goldman Sachs transcripts. He wouldn't fight what looked like some kind of vote fraud in Iowa. He wouldn't even ask for a recount in Iowa, and so forth. The Tax Wall Street Party fought harder for Bernie than Bernie would fight for Bernie. We tried to get a recount going, right? But without the principle, of course. And then we're told, "Oh, there was massive vote fraud in New York." Well, we want to hear that from Bernie's mouth, for Christ's sake. How can anybody take that seriously? How can we be, well, sometimes we were, but we can't always be more Bernie than Bernie himself. And we also told them what to do programmatically. We told them to stay away from the Saudi Arabian royal family. He was going around saying the Saudis need to get their hands dirty. The Saudi hands are already quite dirty enough, Bernie. And that was a real that was a wretched excuse for a foreign policy line. He could have split, Mrs. Clinton from Obama saying, hey, Clinton, you forced Obama into Libya when he didn't want to, and you were so worried about Bernard-Henri Lévy and Sarkozy and the British-French combo. You did that, Mrs. Clinton. So Bernie couldn't get himself together, because you remember in the Southern phase, he was always she was trying to make it look like that Bernie was somehow an enemy of Obama, and that could have been refuted, and on a war and peace issue would have been quite effective. All right, so let's talk about Obama. Let's talk about Trump. According to the Weekly Standard, Trump is not of sound mind. Good. He's not. He is certainly not. And we also have the Ezra Klein writing in Vox. We find that he goes through this very interesting thing. He has two articles. One is about that the contest between the two candidates now is between abnormal and normal. And let me embroider this a little bit myself. It's between a normal, corrupt bourgeois or bourgeoise politician, a normal, corrupt bourgeois politician, jingoistic, right, bellicose, jingo, and a psychotic Nazi. So, which one is easier to control? Here's the other thing about Hillary. It takes a village. Hillary really can't be a very strong figure in terms of public support, because what we're seeing is it takes this entire team, this entire committee, it's like a brigade of supporters, surrogates and others, to get her, even into contention. It takes a village to elect Hillary Clinton. Yeah, it takes all these people. She's got to have Obama, Michelle Obama, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, on and on, right? We've got all these different people. All of them have to basically carry her into the competition. So what I think about that is that might be also a way to manage her, because of course the obvious problem with Hillary is that she has these very strong warmongering tendencies. There's no use kidding yourself about that. Matter of fact, you've got to address it, and you've got to come up with some idea of how to control this, because otherwise people they won't see the contrast with Trump. The contrast with Trump, in my view, is real, and they are distinguishable outcomes. But as long as Hillary is talking about this stuff, it's going to be hard to reassure people. Well, the most obvious, right? She says she wants a no-fly zone over Syria. If you go for a no-fly zone over Syria right now, you're going to collide with Russia, and you're going to collide with Syria, and you might even collide with Turkey. You don't know, right, in whatever form. So that has got to be neutralized. And I think one way to neutralize it is to say, look, Hillary, you didn't get here on your own, right? It took a village. You're not going to be the autocratic president. You can't do that, because that's not the structure of your, if you have an administration, it's not going to work that way. So you're going to have to lay off no-fly zone over Syria, right? Stop the vendetta against Assad. It is absurd. It is obsolete. The best thing that Obama and Kerry could do is end this civil war in Syria, destroy ISIS. We're told that Nusra is changing its name. They're rebranding. The leaders of Nusra are getting a facelift so they don't look like Al-Qaeda anymore. Well, I would say to Obama, give the order to crush ISIS before Halloween, before the end of October. No more ISIS. Otherwise, that becomes the club that Trump can beat you over the head with. And again, there's this other angle too. We're going to talk about this in just a minute. If Trump is going to have an October surprise, and he's calling for one, right, the other day, Obama and the Democrats have to have their own October surprise. Now, here are a couple of things that I thought of, right? The first is, look at Harry Truman in 1948. This is Give 'em Hell Harry, 1948. Remember, he was not an elected president. He had been vice president for Roosevelt, and then after a very few months, he had succeeded to Roosevelt in the presidency in April of 1945, when Roosevelt died about 2 weeks before the end of the war in Europe. Okay, so there he was, and he was by 1948. And this is his own fault, right? What Truman had done was to attack key parts of the New Deal base, above all labor, right? He had used the army against strikers. He had nationalized the steel mills. But the key thing he did right after his convention, called the Congress back for an emergency session. That's what Obama needs to do. Back in a minute. Back to Access Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. So Ezra Klein at Vox wants to know, have we stopped to appreciate how crazy Trump has gotten lately? That he's off the deep end. He's nuts. Klein says that Trump's press conference was the craziest, most self-destructive press conference in political history. Off script, off, unhinged, settling scores, attacking Cruz, attacking Cruz's father again. And of course, these people were all in the rearview mirror, right? Doesn't matter. There's no reason to say any of this. And again, Stephen Hayes of the Weekly Standard says, it's not about tactics or messaging. It's something simpler and something much more important. Donald Trump is not of sound mind. And I'm calling, we found some people at the convention who were interested in this, right? We found a guy who's actually writing it up, that we need some kind of a conference that paid for by the Democratic National Committee, paid for by them, an international conference on the question of insanity in public figures, right? In other words, what is it with Trump? Is it obsessive compulsive? Is it narcissistic personality disorder? Is it this bovine spongiform, essentially mad cow disease? Is it the thing that killed his father, Alzheimer's, or some other form, right? Because my list is about 10 points long. So Trump nuts. Now, you can't expect Trump to respond to anything. Dr. Anthony Fauci of the NIH, National Institutes of Health here in Bethesda, Maryland. He's the director of the infectious disease department, right? He has been there for quite a while. This is a dedicated civil servant. So he says the funding in the U.S. government system to fight Zika virus is now dangerously low. We're in danger of running out of the things we need to fight the Zika virus. So you're talking about destroying the lives of babies, okay? So I say to Obama, call the Congress back for an emergency session and tell them, you SOBs, vote funding for Zika virus, and see what happens with that. Put them on the spot. Get the Klieg lights on them. Get the spotlight on them and say, you fund that. And also we should say, in order to cool down the cities, maybe in the last phase of the summer coming up, and in order to fight the general impoverishment and immiseration of the American people, which is undeniable. It's the fault of Wall Street, of course, but in this case, government has to provide the remedy. The government has to repair what Wall Street has tried to destroy, and that would be the $15 minimum wage, right? In other words, you want to show that the Democratic Party wants to do something for you, call the Congress back and say, we want two things from you. We want money in the billions, right? Whatever the demand is. I think it's 2 to 3 billion to fight Zika right now. And we want the immediate institution of the $15 minimum wage. Tie them up in knots. Let's see them get out of that. And of course, they're going to do it. And then what's Trump going to do? He would have to then take a position, and that would become a binding position, not a throwaway line, right? Not some babbling that he can then, he'll deny it the very next day, right? You got to have a press conference. Trump, do you support money for Zika? Trump, do you support the $15 minimum wage? Because before you said the wages were already too high, and it wasn't quite clear. Did he say there should be no minimum wage, or the minimum wage should not be raised, or whatever else it was? All right. A couple of things, therefore. The press has got to grill Trump. Where are your tax returns, Trump? Do you have connections to Russian organized crime? Right? The Kremlin is one thing, but there's a Russian mafia which is distinct from the Kremlin, and that's this guy Sater. Remember Trump Soho condominium hotel, and that's Sater, the Russian organized crime figure, ex-convict, mafioso. And I had coined this thing that Trump should reorganize as Sater and Sater. That is Sater, the Russian gangster, and Satyr, and the Satyr, right? That kind of Satyr with satyriasis. That would be then the Donald, or Sleazy Don, as we call him. But in addition to the taxes, we want to see his medical records. Medical records have to be provided, and above all, his mental health records, because Trump says, oh, I have a mild case of obsessive compulsive disorder. In other words, I have a mild case of the Howard Hughes disease. Well, is there such a thing as a mild case? And do you want that mild case controlling the stubby finger on the thermonuclear launch console? No. All right. Now, here's the other thing. Trump's monstrous press conference. This is where he won the title of Traitor Trump. Traitor Trump's treason started midweek when he said, I guess it was on Wednesday in the morning of a press conference, that he wanted Russia or whoever, he said maybe it's not Russia, but somebody should come up with the 30,000 emails that Hillary had caused to disappear, right, which she had expunged or wiped clean or whatever this was. And of course, we're also indignant because we want to show what a fraud the Arab Spring was. But now we're left with something bigger. We have been talking here about the October surprise. The October surprise coming in the context of a strategy of tension. The strategy of tension has been going on for some time. It has names. It was the San Bernardino shootings, which allowed Trump then to propose his ban on Muslims, right? There's a dialectic exchange, right, back and forth, a shuttle between the what Trump's saying in terms of racism and exclusion and these events, right? And let's call them false flag events now, because every plausible deniability has now dropped. See, up to now, it was necessary to say, well, intelligence community factions above and behind Trump want to promote his candidacy. They're arranging false flag terrorism. Yeah, but now Trump comes out and says, I'm calling in foreign forces with a kind of cyber attack, and that's going to be the October surprise. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So at this press conference, Trump says he wants Russian hackers or whoever to find and publish the 30,000 emails which supposedly disappeared from Hillary's server. Forget about the merits of that issue, right? That's not relevant anymore. Once you get up there and say, I want foreign powers and not exactly friendly ones, to interfere in U.S. internal affairs, right? The UN Charter says interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states is inadmissible. No more. Nix. That's pretty clear. And Trump is saying, no, please come interfere, violate international law in my favor. He's appealing to foreigners to help him impose his dictatorship here in the U.S. Unfriendly acts lie down this road. Now, again, I don't think Russia is the principal object of scrutiny. I would say that you have to remember location is not attribution. There is, in my view, despite all this Guccifer business, there is no proof that Russia has leaked anything. We do seem to know that the British agent Assange has wantonly interfered, that he essentially he wants Trump to win. Assange wants Trump to win. It's practically an endorsement. It's the sincerest endorsement. Assange, remember where he comes from, the MK Ultra flesh pile. Children, as a child, he was molested. He was given industrial strength psychopharmaca, LSD, put in dark rooms as a part of the Anne Hamilton Byrne cult in Australia, an MK Ultra operations. Here we have an MK Ultra zombie, Assange. Sometimes he feels like a blonde, sometimes he doesn't. He comes in and wants to influence the U.S. election. Hey, we're headed towards Banana Republic, but the cheering squad is Trump. We are going to become the object of operations adrift on the ocean of adventures. That's where we're headed. So we got to do something about this, right? The U.S. deserves better. The American people deserve better. So location is not attribution. The people who really want to destabilize the U.S., it seems to me, are the British-Chinese alliance. And the problem for Putin is that once he started with Snowden in particular, and RT endorsing Assange all over the place, right? Tailing after these limited hangout artists, because that's what they are, then it becomes hard to turn away, right? It becomes hard to denounce them because it becomes a problem of Russian internal politics. So yes, the U.S. Started this stuff. Hillary Clinton supported color revolutions in Russia in early 2011. And that was really bad. This should stop. But it's not wise to retaliate tit for tat in kind, right? You got to be, I think, a little bit more clever. So I would avoid the path of retaliation and escalation, because I would say President Putin has not fared well in terms of public opinion this week. In other words, people who are very sympathetic to his positions would have a hard time defending some of this stuff in public if you read it in the way that the media say. But fortunately here, we don't. Okay? So now, the October surprise. Assange, coming out of MK Ultra in Australia and being in London, I think this is the British behind him. The former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, Michael McFaul, who is, in my mind, a malevolent academic, McFaul is asking in public, is there an October surprise as far as Hillary Clinton is concerned, says McFaul. Is there an October surprise in terms of Hillary Clinton? Okay. Brian Williams on, I guess, yesterday evening, on MSNBC, talking to Steve Schmidt, the Republican operative who had worked for McCain. Brian Williams talked about exigencies. You can see this in my my Twitter. Exigencies that might influence the elections, right? And when he says exigencies, he means terror attacks, right? It's clear. And Schmidt says, oh, yes, this is highly relevant because we could have a situation where we'd be having one existential attack a week. Now, an existential attack means something that poses life or death, stability or collapse for a country. So that's what he says about that. Steve Schmidt and Brian Williams talking about this stuff. Then we have today in the Washington Post, Charles Krauthammer, neocon, Friday, July 29th, this morning. And here's what he has. What's the case for Hillary Clinton? Question mark, a bunch of verbiage. Hillary still enjoys the Democrats' built-in electoral college advantage, but she remains highly vulnerable to both outside events and internal revelations. Now, that could be the same thing, right? Trump is basically saying, I'm calling in cyber attacks on Hillary so I can win the election. She remains highly vulnerable to both outside events and internal revelations. Another major terror attack, another email drop, and everything changes. In this crazy election year, there are no straight line predictions. As Clinton leaves Philadelphia, her lifelong drive for the ultimate prize is perilously close to a coin flip. Okay, so there's a neocon, right, warmonger, hardcore, right? He's devoted to neocon warmongering and nothing but. So you can see that there are archipelagos of blackmail and so forth. Let's see, we have a couple of other things here. This is now NBC News. NBC News, July 27th. Democrats fear cyber October surprise that could sink Clinton. It's not a question of whether more information is coming from Assange and this gang, but how destructive it might be to Hillary Clinton. Democratic Party and other officials are going through and they're doing damage assessment. And here we get a quote from Admiral James Stavridis. Now, remember, this was the NATO Supreme Commander who was forced out around the time of the 2012 elections. And you're going to remember that Stavridis was forced out in that same group that contained Petraeus and Allen. Of course, Allen was at the convention. We got to get to him in a minute if we have time. Here's what he says, quote, that is a nightmare scenario. In other words, really damaging things, right? Quote, that is a nightmare scenario, and let's hope we don't see that as an October surprise. Emails from Hillary Clinton's server that have either been in the press or worse, the classified ones that no one in the public has seen, said Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Commander, knowledgeable about Russian ops. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So, the October surprise, embedded in this somewhat longer-term strategy of tension, which has been going on since last December or thereabouts, right, the San Bernardino, always stoking the campaign of Trump, always providing fuel for Trump, always sending water to Trump's mill, right, his mill of lies and blackmail. Trump has now come out. He basically says, I am the party of the foreigner, says Trump. That's his position. Remember, General de Gaulle used to attack le parti de l'étranger. Here it is, the party of the foreigner, Donald Trump. Why do they like him? Because he destroys the U.S. He's going to make the U.S. weak, poverty-stricken, divided, right? Everybody at each other's throats, and above all, isolated in the world, right? Destroying these alliances with his stupidity. he has no idea how much different NATO allies spend or provide for the U.S. or anything of the sort. Now, here's a couple of things that I would say. Obama, you have to get busy and fire some people, right? We talked in the previous week about the French Interior Minister Cazeneuve and also Val, the Freemasons, right? Time to fire some of those Freemasons on the French side, right? We noticed the French police were demanding, Cazeneuve was demanding that the authorities in Nice destroy the cameras that showed the event, right? Why did they do it? Oh, of course, to conceal our methods. Well, we don't think so. We think it's to conceal something much, much worse than that. But here, for the U.S., the general who commands the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command is General Keith Alexander. Fire him now. Out. Gone. Finish. You have failed. The foreign powers are interfering in our election. General Keith Alexander, it's time to go. Take ministerial responsibility. How dare you demand that you get more power and more tenure in office based on your failures? Okay? So we're looking for tension, strategy of tension and October surprise. International terrorism, domestic terrorism, some of it of novel kinds, like that prison strike. Financial panics can be unleashed. Riots, right? Sort of summer riots in the streets, in the inner cities, generally chaos. That's the idea. Trump as the bringer of chaos. And as of today, I don't think he has plausible deniability because, again, he's calling in cyber attacks. He's calling them in. He's basically saying, foreign powers, hostile or not, come and participate in my campaign. I need you. I can't set up my dictatorship without your help. So strike. Treason. Adhering to the enemies of the United States and giving them aid and comfort with overt acts. There's your overt act. Traitor Trump. It's time for him to be questioned. And then they're already saying, well, does he really have that intent? Yeah, he does. He thinks he's going to ride into power. He's going to have a coup d'etat under the cover of a terrorist event. Hey, sounds like the Reichstag fire. Who did that? Hitler, Goebbels. This is the school of Trump. Now, a couple of other things. Domestic economics, right? It gets short shrift, right? A lot of these, the Bernie people, I think, are they claim to be interested in economic reform, stuff like this. But I think really, in some cases, it's just a pretext to feel self-righteous when you go out and pontificate and protest in a totally irresponsible way, ridiculous, as that charming comedienne has said. So look, for example, interesting in Bernie Sanders' speech on Monday night was the free college, right? That if you have, there's apparently an agreement between the Bernie campaign and the Hillary campaign that families with a family income up to $125,000 per year can get free college. In other words, free college if you're in the middle class and debt-free college if you're anybody in state institutions. Now, this is a real plus. The problem with it is, and you'll see this with other things that are positive in the Democratic platform and in the Hillary campaign, who pays? And the question of who pays is a class question. Shouldn't it be the finance oligarchs, the vulture capitalists, the hedge fund hyenas, the zombie bankers of Wall Street who pay for this stuff? Who created the world economic depression? Who speculated in derivatives, right? Who had AIG? They did. Wall Street. And, of course, a lot of those banks are gone, but some of them are still here, and it can be traced. So class against class, we want to know who pays for the depression. Exhausted working families cannot be forced to pay for things. Extremely wealthy banks and corporations, and we're not talking so much individuals, although they should obviously pay their share. But the big thing is to make Wall Street pay. And here we come to this wonderful Tax Wall Street Party, the Wall Street sales tax, the 1% Wall Street sales tax on turnover, not on profits, on turnover, buying and selling, just like you. Right? Whatever you buy, it's going to be taxed. And then Hillary keeps saying the biggest job program since World War II. Now, this is not specified, and the same criteria apply. We want to hear that the biggest job program since World War II is a combination of two things. The 1% Wall Street sales tax on transactions, turnover, Tobin tax, which brings tens of billions to hundreds of billions. Nobody knows because the derivatives are not yet reportable, despite the very weak Dodd-Frank. And then the other question is the forcing the Federal Reserve to do this, right? Elizabeth Warren, whom they all love, in 2013, for at least a couple of months, was saying that the Federal Reserve should be forced by legislation to lend college loans at 0.75%, which is way below the going rate. So she set that precedent. So we're not coming out of left field here if we say the Democratic Party, the Hillary campaign, must specify that when it comes to that biggest job program, this should not be a way for Lazard Frere and the Felix Rohatyn tradition to go along, right? So that they think they're going to have an infrastructure bank and Wall Street will skim out of that and loot it and what have you. No, this should be Federal Reserve money lent directly to the people who are letting the contracts. It was the states, the counties, the cities, local governments, and so forth. And that's what we say is $5 trillion of 0% 100-year credit, 5 trillion of 0% century bonds to rebuild the entire infrastructure. So she's talking the biggest job program after World War II. We would have to say some of that sounds okay, but Wall Street pays. Wall Street pays either through the 1% tax on turnover, Wall Street sales tax, or the money is going to be 0% 100-year loans coming from the Federal Reserve. So that's a real important thing. But you have to say, free college and a big job program, this is much more than Trump ever dreamed of saying, right? Trump essentially proposed nothing in his Grand Guignol kind of convention, right? Midnight in America, right? The film noir convention of the Republicans. So those are some considerations. We're going to get General Allen, I guess, next week. Just watch out. All kinds of people are going to try to jump on campaigns to try to get themselves into power. And Allen remains what we've always said he was, just that he's trying to get back into the White House through Hillary.